Do you ever wonder what athletes really think about sport, about their experiences, about their teammates, about social issues? Hi, I'm Keith Lee, your host for It's About Time. You know, my family and friends for years have been telling me that I need to speak up, that it was about time for me to share my experiences, the lessons I've learned, and my other observations about sport as an athlete, as a coach, as a fan. And so both inside sport and outside of sport. They also asked me to share my experience of over 30 years as being a diversity trainer and things that I've learned while teaching diversity workshops. So that's what this series is about, what I've learned. And I guess it's about time. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to this channel, as this is only one in a series of many topics that I think you'll find interesting. We welcome your comments. Very interested to hear your perspective on what we're talking about. So stay with us. We're going to talk about our first episode today. And we're going to talk about friendship and how it's built through sport. Thank you. Stay with us. Sport in our society is one of the most powerful and influential dimensions that we can imagine. Sport and entertainment, obviously. But in particular, sport, it has power both inside and outside of its own particular world. Certainly outside, you know, sport has the potential to unite people, to unite cities and communities and states and colleges and universities. It even has the power to unify and unite countries. It's a very, very, very powerful part of our society. Internally, sport oftentimes involves the unity of those particular participants of the sport. I guess we're going to talk about today those friendships that are built on the back of sport, you know, and I know I have a lot of good friends that have come as a result of sport participation, and I'm just wondering why. I'm just curious why that happens. I'm sure it's not unlike our brothers and sisters in the military. So what are the common factors associated with that? Well, one of the things I can think of, and certainly, again, add your comments, but, together you learn how to overcome adversity. And overcoming adversity is not unique to sport. It's something that we have to learn to do in our journey in life. How do we overcome it? How do we see an obstacle just seeing it as a challenge and figuring out ways to overcome that? And when you do it together with a teammate or whatever, a partner, a co-worker, there's a lesson to be learned from that. I think in sport, you understand, either consciously or unconsciously, you learn how to value the power of teamwork, the power of working together, the power of cooperation. You learn how to handle success and failure together, right? I mean, most athletes will tell you one of the worst feelings they have is defeat. Well, if you have this terrible feeling and you're not the only one sharing it, and you had a shared experience, you learn something about each other, about how you handle failure or perceived failure, and you learn how to handle success in terms of victories and how you celebrate and the lessons you learn from that. These lifelong friendships that we're discussing today they really don't matter what level of sport you participated in. I've talked to many, many people who, in conversations, they talk about friends they've had since Little League Baseball or youth soccer or the YMCA Basketball League. And they're still friends. And not just friends, they're good friends. You know, there's some other factors associated with this bonding that happens in the building of this friendship between teammates, there's, there's a inevitable trust you have to have with the teammate. And again, this is all because of this common bond, a common goal, shared experiences. There has to be a great degree of trust that's developed over time. And from that, there's a certain level of respect. You don't, it's not always necessary that you like someone, but in most cases, it's required that you respect them. I know I learned a lesson from one of my high school coaches, who also was ended up being one of my coaches in junior college. He taught me a lesson in high school that I'll never forget, and I used it years after. And he told me, as a leader of a football team in this case, it's required that I have a relationship with every player on the team, even if I didn't like them, even if they didn't like me. He said my worst relationship should always be at least hi and bye, because then at least you're acknowledging someone's presence and you respect them. And that's all really a lot of people want is respect. It's not necessarily you love them or like them, but you have to respect them. So I never forgot that. And I noticed that happens on sports teams. There's a level of respect that's there, especially in the friendship area. From that, you develop this feeling of responsibility for your teammate. You trust them, you respect them. Some cases you like them, but not necessary. But you still have a sense of responsibility for them in terms of helping them achieve their goals, because their goals are common with the team. And so therefore you have a cooperation. And from cooperation you have this coordination. And then what happens over time is you have this dependency. So all these shared experiences and all these different attributes that are involved with, I guess, what they call team chemistry, oftentimes develops this friendship. And this bonding happens. So let's talk about this bonding that happens. This, in my opinion, it happens most of the time in the locker room, right? The locker room is a very special place. A lot of things happen in the locker room. Sometimes they're obvious, sometimes they're not as obvious. But in this case, I guess what I'm referring to is in the locker room, you really can't hide your character. Over time, your character is going to be revealed. And a person's true character, in the sense that that's where everyone witnesses you and your true self, right? How do you handle defeat? How do you handle success? What do you think of yourself? What are your real strengths and weaknesses? You really can't hide there. But in a locker room, because of the common bond and because of shared experience most of the time, things happen. You get closer to your teammates if you spend enough time there. You share your fears, your frustrations. You share things about your personal life, your dreams and disappointments. You share a lot of things because you spend so much time together in this environment that you just can't help it. And so you see a person's real self there. I know I've had occasions to where, unfortunately, there's some negative things that happen. I've seen teammates still come to the locker room or come to work, if you will, after a death in their family. And that's an opportunity by which you can console your teammate. And barriers tend to break down because certainly death is not something that's taken lightly, not even by athletes, not even by football players. And if you can console your teammate and have that opportunity and he trusts and respects you, it means a lot. I've seen celebrations happen where you share the birth of your first child with your teammates, and that's exciting, and it's a real cool experience. Other family matters happen that are shared between teammates. Again, building this bond of friendship that goes beyond the game, goes beyond the sport, and though it goes beyond the locker room, um, the experience and the friendship is still there. I had an occasion um, where a good friend of mine and former teammate shared with me something very personal in his life, and he was really conflicted. This was a fine gentleman, a good man, and though I won't get too deep into the culture of sport, I will talk a little bit about um, what happens with temptation. In this case, temptation of women, and you don't necessarily have to be of that mindset to go out and chase women. Quite frankly, it happens often where you're the hunted. You don't have to hunt. And that's not an egotistical statement. That's just the reality of that culture. Well, in this case, a good friend of mine, former teammate, he confided in me that he didn't know what to do. He gave in and he cheated on his wife. And he really didn't know what to do. Now, that's not something you share with a casual acquaintance on a football team. That's something you share with someone you trust and respect and seek their advice. I don't know if I helped or not, but I was honored in this case to be able to give my perspective and help him because he needed someone to talk to. And this came out of the blue. I didn't know this was going to happen, but it happened. And though we don't talk a lot these days, we're much older now and have different things going on in our lives. I'm sure, well, it's happened. If we've talked before, and it's just like yesterday. It's almost like we're still sitting in the locker room in terms of the foundation we built regarding trust, respect, responsibility, and cooperation. You know, in that locker room, other things happen that may not be understood by people who weren't there or have never been in a locker room. But in terms of handling conflict, you know, I guess I wouldn't advocate for it, but I understand it. In terms of if there was a conflict on the team, two gentlemen, good term, two gentlemen had a conflict, and there was no other way to settle it. They settled it in the locker room. And yes, it got physical. Remember, you got a bunch of testosterone flying around every which way at the highest level. So it was settled in the locker room. But I will say this. Once it was over, it was over. It didn't linger on. It didn't last. It was over. And that's how it was settled. You know, we had a saying at that time when I played, and I don't know if it's still there or not. Obviously, it's not followed, I don't think, in today's modern sport. But what it was what happens in the locker room stays in the locker room. At risk of sounding like Las Vegas. But it was true. Things were settled, things were shared, things were talked about. Yeah, it happened in the locker room. I had another occasion. I don't. Some of you may remember. It was in the '80s, and I was on the Patriots at that time. And during this time, this is when the new situation with female reporters coming in a male locker room. In this case, there was a situation where some female reporters wanted to come into our locker room after the game. To state the obvious, most players at that time after the game, we weren't fully dressed. We were about to prepare to take a shower, or we were in the training room, and we were, quite frankly, butt naked. And but because the reporters felt that that was their workplace, they felt they had a right to come in. Well, again, as I stated earlier, the locker room being such a special place, we resisted that. We didn't want that. We felt that that was our space to be ourselves, and we didn't have to be on stage for the public entertainment. It was our locker room. And so we resisted. But the powers went out, and after one game, the doors flew open. Now, I'm going to admit some of my guilt because I was involved in a situation that made it that made it get a little, I don't know, more attention. We'll say it that way. There was one particular reporter, female reporter, who wanted to come into the locker room. And now this young lady was probably 5'5", 5'6" in height. She wanted to interview one of our players who was about 6'5". He went probably 250. And so she came in the locker room. Me and some other teammates, we decided to take bets on how many seconds it would take for her to take a peek. It's a good way to say it. Now remember, you've got, I don't know, 70, 80 athletes, male athletes with no clothes on in the locker room. So this environment could appear to be somewhat uncomfortable for some people. But anyway, she went up to ask him some questions with the microphone, and of course, being only 5'5", she had to reach up and ask him, for his answer on some particular questions she was asking. So I think you kind of get the idea, the geometry of this situation was interesting. Is that a good word? But anyway, we took a bet on how many seconds it would take for her to have to take a peek, and I won the bet. It was 12 seconds, if you just have to know. And so after I won the bet, we erupted in laughter and talking trash and this and that, but not to her, just among ourselves. And there was another female reporter in the locker room who observed and just heard us laughing and talking trash. And I guess it upset her, even though she wasn't involved. But I guess I share that story just to emphasize the fact that our stance and our protective nature of what we considered our workplace, the reason being is because we knew that's a very special place for the players. That's where we can you're really stripped down, no pun intended, in a locker room. And I mean figuratively stripped down. You can't hide. Your character is revealed to other men. And I don't know. I think that's where you get your respect, is there. So I think the foundation for building these lifelong friendships start in the locker room. And that's why in most cases, if you interview athletes after the game is over, and you ask them what they miss most, one of the things they'll state early is they miss the locker room. And that's part of the reason why. Oh man, there's so many more stories that happen in the locker room that I could share that were funny. There were some that were sad, some were funny. When I was in Buffalo, I was a rookie then, and rookies get hazed. Hazing wasn't frowned upon at that time. And as a rookie, you kind of get tired of being hazed and awakened, I guess, at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning every day when you have 3 practices a day and you're trying to get some rest. So we decided that we were going to, teach a lesson to these veterans who wanted to haze us all the time. So there was one particular player who we decided to pay back, if you will, and we decided to go after the two most important things to him. His football shoes. He probably had 85 pair of shoes in his locker, and his new Corvette that was sitting in the parking lot. So, I don't know, one day we decided to set his shoes on fire with some lighter fluid and then call him into the locker room and just let him, just let him walk in and see it. And it happened. It was the funniest thing. He panicked and he was trying to blow it out, and it wasn't working because it was lighter fluid. Later on that night, we stole a bunch of athletic tape, and we decided to tape him to the roof of his brand new Corvette and set his alarm off. So the coaches would come out and wonder what the hell is going on. And it was him taped to his car. Needless to say, the hazing stopped in the locker room in particular. So I don't know. That's just one of those deals where I'm just sharing the experience of things that happen in the locker room and how special it was to us. But more importantly, these friendships, these lifelong friendships that are built from the experience of sport. Another example of the power of sport in our society. Well, thanks for listening. Listen, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and add your comments in the comments section. Really be interested to hear what you have to say or any questions you may have. We look forward to speaking with you, and it's time to speak up. As my family would say, it's about time. Thanks. Take care and God bless.